Right to be Read podcast, episode number 48. Interview with Adam Gamalin.
You are listening to the Right to be Read podcast, and this is your host, Ani Alexander.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Right to be Read podcast. I'm your host, Ani Alexander, and as always, I'm delighted that you're here and you're listening to me again. So before we start, just a reminder that the show notes of this episode you can find at www.anialexander.com/48. And in the show notes, you will get links for 3 free resources that I've created for you. And those are 3 free PDFs that will enormously help you in preparing and publishing your book, in finding the perfect affordable professional cover for your book, and in using Twitter to build your audience and readership. And today's interview is not so much about inspiration and encouragement, although that we have in it too, but it's mainly from those interviews where I introduce you to different tools and options and possibilities that you could use in order to grow as an author and in order to have simpler solutions for your publishing. So today I will be talking with the co-founder of InShares. And what is InShares? It's basically a crowdfunded publishing. And if you put it in very simple terms, authors pitch, the crowd funds, and they publish. So it's a platform which is designed for a diverse range of authors who want a better alternatives to traditional publishing. So let's start the interview and find out what a crowdfunding publishing is about and what it can offer to newbie writers. Today I'm talking to Adam Gamalin. He's the co-founder of InShares. And since he knows much better than me what InShares is and what it's about, I would like him to introduce the InShares for us.
Hi. Yeah. Well, thanks for having us on. InShares is a crowdfunded publisher. The process is pretty simple. Authors pitch, the crowd funds, and we publish. We went live about 6 months ago. Right now, we see about 1 book per week crowdfunding. It's a pretty exciting month for us. Just a couple days ago, people ordered about $25,000 of books in a single day. So we're growing quickly, but yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process. What we wanted to do was democratize access to all of the wonderful things that publishers could do in terms of really great editorial, really wonderful design, access to the offset printing production process, and print distribution internationally. That was really, and it really remains our goal today.
Wow, amazing. And what about, how did you come up with this idea? Did you write yourself, or did you have anything to do with self-publishing before?
Yeah, the idea was originally created not by me, but one of the other co-founders, Thad Woodman, who is actually on an airplane right now he's flying to Nashville, Tennessee to spend some time with Ingram, which is the biggest book distributor in the world and also one of our investors. Thad kind of grew up in publishing. His parents founded and sold a very successful publishing company in the mid-90s. His brother Spencer is a journalist, and I think he was looking around and he said, $100 million has crossed Kickstarter, if you include kind of graphic books. In terms of crowdfunding for books, and that's a pretty significant number, but we don't know where those books go. Do they get great editors? Do they end up in bookstores? Do those authors really have a chance to succeed? You mentioned self-publishing. Personally, I've always been someone who loves to write. I'm also our general counsel, so I'm a lawyer by training, and a lot of lawyers, I think, much like many of the people that are hopefully listening to this podcast, harbor a desire to perhaps quit their day job and really, write the next great novel. So that's certainly something that, as a lover of the written word and someone who loves to write, that I think it's a passion for not just me, but for all of us here at InShares.
Okay, so very interesting. So now it means, can we go through the process? Let's say I'm a new author, or I have written a new book and I have the draft manuscript in place. I discovered your website. What do I do next?
Right. There is the first thing that I would suggest somebody do when getting to InShares is probably just to browse around. To take a look, get a feel for the site, what we do, some of the amazing and fantastic talented authors that are crowdfunding on there right now and that have already successfully crowdfunded and are now publishing their books. But there's a big green button that says Start a Project. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest that they click on that button. It takes you through a whole flow. It asks you, a number of detailed questions. Are you writing fiction? Are you writing nonfiction? How long is your book? What format do you wish to publish in? All of those numbers feed into an algorithm that figures out how much it'll cost to produce that book, which is the amount that needs to be crowdfunded in terms of pre-sold books. And that's the number that we all work toward. We see that as the demand. It actually might benefit us to take a step back and ask ourselves why crowdfunding and publishing are so important together. When we were all, founding InShares a year ago, the actual product launched about 6 months ago. We took a look around at publishing and we said, this is an industry that makes a lot of money. It made almost $20 billion last year, and that excludes self-publishing. It doesn't include, the revenue from the 1.2, 1.3 million books published on places like Amazon's CreateSpace. But there's always this discussion of, what's wrong with publishers. And for us, we thought, the main issue is that a small number of people make a decision about what a very large number of people are going to read, right? Mm-hmm. So a small number of acquisitions editors decide what books get purchased and greenlit and are given access to legacy publishing. We said, what if instead of 1 or 2 or 3 people making those decisions, what if it was 1 or 2 or 3,000? What if it was 100 or 200 or 300,000? What would have happened if J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, after being rejected 18 or however many times it was, what if she had put the first chapter of Harry Potter on InShares and people all across the world had read it and they'd said, this is one really talented author and this is an amazing story and narrative. And they had all decided to pre-order the book. That would have been an amazing thing. And that's really the world that we sought out to help build. But there's a really awesome corollary part of that. Most authors only take home, most authors don't get an advance from a publisher, and they take home only about 10% of royalties, maybe 15% of royalties, which means more often than not, they're only making $1 a book. If you figure the average book only sells 6,000 copies, that's not very much money for an author to live on, right?
Exactly.
Now, the problem with traditional publishers, they do a lot of wonderful things, and they do many of them great. I'm sitting here in my office, and there's books stacked, everywhere, and those are books that have been made by traditional publishers. So we're not trying to wage war on that industry, really. We have a lot of respect for it. But, when you greenlight a lot of books that don't sell because you never involved the crowd in vetting them, then you have this kind of ancillary problem, which is that you have to make up for on your big sellers what you lose on everything else. So that's why they take 90% of royalties. It means that they make so much money on the Harry Potters that they can make up for all what they lost everywhere else. But that's really one of the main problems. So for us, the crowdfunding subsidizes the cost to produce the book. So because we've already vetted the market for the book, we have less risk as a publisher, and we're able to give authors 50% of gross revenue and 70% in digital. So that's really like how we see ourselves. An author comes to us with a manuscript, Maybe it's just the first chapter, or if it's a nonfiction, they've got the outline and the page goes up. Usually the author, creates the page and they'll ping us and we'll dive in and give some suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
And, the crowd will read it and say, we really love this. And, we had a book the other day raise, $20,000. And that was just from people signing on and reading it and saying, I want to buy that book. I'll buy it now for $25. And I'll buy it for $25. And I'll buy 10 for $250.
Wow.
And, that's a book that we now know that people really, really, really want. It's a book that we know that people want, and it's just a really great embodiment of what InShares is and what we set out to do.
Oh, it's very interesting. So just a question. There are many people who are starting out and they don't have yet their own audiences, which might back them up, let's say. Do you have does your site has embedded audience that they can rely on, like at least some number of people? Or if you are just starting out and you don't have your own audience, this thing won't work for you?
Yeah. Certainly what InShares wants to be one day is a site where an author need only show up with a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And they're funded on the kind of independent enthusiasm of readers across the world. We have seen some projects develop kind of backing far beyond the circle of initial backers. So we've seen runaway funders for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to be really candid with all authors. The authors that we've seen succeed the most on InShares are authors that already have an audience. We have seen people crowdfund effectively who had 17 Twitter followers. We have a book coming out in February called Slim and the Beast by a wonderful young author who's about 27 years old and lives in France. He's an American expatriate, and it's wonderful. It's just a beautiful piece of literary fiction. And he had 17 Twitter followers. He had really no audience to speak of,
Mm-hmm.
and he was determined. And he wrote to blogs, and he walked into bookstores, and he did readings. And he did it. It was really, really unbelievable to watch.
Oh, interesting.
So we have seen people without a kind of pre-established base or audience successfully crowdfund. And there are certainly people that come to InShares to back books. The information architecture of the site right now is not built to refer people to other projects. So if you backed one project, it doesn't come up and say, hey, you should also back this.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen almost somewhere between 10 and 20% of people that have backed one project have backed another project. So we are seeing that kind of repeat backing. That makes us really, really happy, in terms of we've always I think it speaks to a desire for individual readers to play an active role in the literary world. There is something wonderful about being part of making a book possible. So certainly that's where we are going. And certainly we have seen people without a large social graph or without a pre-established base or audience fund. But it's a lot easier with it.
Mm-hmm, I see. And what happens?
Can I add just one more quick comment on that?
Absolutely. Sure. Go ahead.
The problem of having a base that you bring with you is fortunately or unfortunately no different at InShares than it would be at an Amazon's CreateSpace,
Mm-hmm.
or in many cases even at a legacy publisher. One of the biggest things that a legacy publisher looks for in deciding whether or not to acquire a book is how many Facebook or Twitter followers, what is the social media graph of this author? The kind of signal from noise problem that exists on self-publishing, right? You can publish a book on CreateSpace, and CreateSpace is an amazing tool. But, you are one book in a sea of 10, last year, 1.3 million other books.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about base, we're talking about, is there enough people that are already interested in this book to help it gain an initial level of notoriety that it'll, by virtue of that, be able to succeed on its own merit. That's certainly something that we're working on at InShares. But I think that it's a problem that is not in any way different from the ones that a legacy publisher has, or even an open publisher like Amazon's CreateSpace.
Yeah, sure. It's. I mean, this is something that authors have to deal with from the very beginning. It's it takes time, but everyone has to build his own audience anyway, because relying on others is not the wisest thing to do.
No, absolutely. But thank you for asking that question. That's I mean, that's one of the most keen and incisive questions that you could ask.
Yeah, well, because I mean, most of us, I mean, me and my listeners are in the stage when we are just building our audiences, so they are not very large, and it's important to know what to expect. So, okay, as I understood, when you create your project based on the questions that you've been asked, the calculation is done, and the estimated target amount, which needs to be backed up, is already clear from the very beginning. And what happens next? Is it like Kickstarter that either it has to be funded completely, or what happens if it's, let's say, 60% funded?
Yeah, we like Kickstarter are 0 or 1. We are not like IndieGoGo where you can partially fund a project and then take that money. For us, the reason that we chose not to do it that way is that producing a book properly takes a lot of resources. And we don't want to be in a situation where an author raises a portion of the money and then the people who pre-order the book get a kind of like underfunded version of the book that they're not excited about. So yeah, it's that binary 0 or 1 model.
I see. And what about, I mean, usually, we know about how the traditional publishers work and how you can deal with things when you're self-publishing. What when, in your case, let's say my project is backed up already 100%, so it's done. How much control do I have over, how much opinion I can have on cover design, interior design, and things like that, which will be done later on?
Yeah, well, let's first talk about our design resources.
Okay.
We partnered with a design firm called McFadden and Thorpe. They designed some of Chronicle Books' most gorgeous and wonderful books, and they're unbelievably talented. So we work with them in terms of typography, layout, typesetting. So, I mean, we have a pretty immense amount of resources, whether it's, cover design or just kind of interior layout. Yeah. There are lots of really, really interesting parts of laying a book out. One of the really interesting things is that the proliferation of kind of digital publishing today, and by digital publishing, I don't mean print on demand, I mean literally words on a screen, have allowed us to do amazing tests into readability. We've learned that, I think 64 characters is the number of characters that people optimally read per line. When you go to a wonderful open publishing platform like Medium, the people always go, oh my God, and I hope they have the same experience on InShares. This is so clear and easy to read.
Yeah.
And we're really endeavoring right now to take a lot of the kind of readability analyses and all of these new metrics and discoveries and to put them in the context of the book. Now, it's harder because, it turns out that, something that we all intrinsically understand, we don't like to read words and they're grouped too closely together. It's easier to read them when there's more space on the page. That's actually no different from when we were all learning how to read when we were little.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this to say that it's a fantastically interesting process, and it's one that we're genuinely excited about bringing our authors into. It's an amazing thing to create a story, to create the ideas and the words. There's an entire process that most authors, have yet to think about, which is what do those words look like when they're actually placed on a page? What is the font? What is the font size? How close are the words together? How close are the lines together? And that's something that we love being able to take authors into that world. In terms of cover design, it's again a place where we work really, really closely with our authors. It's a place where we talk to book distributors, where we talk to book buyers, and we say, what do you think of these covers? I think it's a round table discussion, but the author has a big seat at that table.
Okay, that's very important. And the other thing which we usually have with traditional publishers are the timings, which are like compared to self-publishing, they're extremely slow. And it takes very long time until you actually have the book physically printed and ready. So what happens with you in this case?
Well, I mean, the production process for a book depends on a host of considerations. I mean, how far along is the manuscript? How much editing will the manuscript take? Where is the book being printed? When you print a book in Hong Kong, it takes 2 to 3 months for that book to get here. If you print it domestically in the United States, it gets here a lot more quickly. And obviously, I imagine your readership is all over the world. So it may take, shorter or longer for a book to go from, Hong Kong to wherever your readers are. There are sales conferences with book distributors. It's fascinating. And of course, we're talking about books. So is it an ebook or is it a print book? An ebook can, hurtle through cyberspace and be, in Amazon in a second. Print books, they go on ships. It's amazing. The tides in the Pacific Ocean can change, how quickly a book gets here. We aim to deliver our books within about 6 months of crowdfunding ending. That's our general goal.
Okay, I see. So once it ends, and I'm looking at the website now and at the projects which one can back up, and I see that when you look at how many days are left until the end of it, here I see like quite large numbers, like 159, 155, over 100, around 90 something. So how long is the period usually?
People are able to change it. We encourage people to do about 47 days. So, just a little over a month and a half. There's some evidence to show that is actually the best number. But we've had some people ask for more time. Some people are very confident and set it for 30 days.
Okay, because I was just thinking, like, let's say I back up a project which has 65 days to go, or 100 days to go. So after that, we know whether the book will be published or not. And then if I need a hard copy, it will take at least 6 months until I get it. Right?
Yeah, in some cases it's a long time, but I think that time is actually very exciting. Let me give you a great example. Daniel Wallace is the best-selling author of Big Fish, which was turned into a movie by Tim Burton starring Ewan McGregor. And Daniel was our first crowdfunded author. He did a children's book called The Cat's Pajamas, which will be hitting stores this Monday. It's a really, really exciting book. But Daniel ended up having to redo a lot of his initial artwork because the nature of the paper in which he had done it and the scans, it just didn't come out properly. So that ended up probably taking 3 to 4 months longer than we initially anticipated. But during that time, Daniel consistently sent updates to his backers saying, "Hey, here's a picture of me. Here's a video of me. Drawing out the new illustrations. What do you think about this one versus this one?" And he really brought his audience with them. I backed that project on InShares. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I loved his updates. One, he's an amazingly talented author, and he took an immense amount of care in speaking with his audience. But one of the things that's been so exciting for authors about InShares isn't just the ability to get access to traditional publishing resources, but the ability to share the publishing process with your readers. So I look at that, an extended kind of runway, so to speak, not as a bad thing, but a good thing.
Yeah,
as an opportunity.
Yeah, it's true that when you involve the audience, they become part of the process, and then they get more involved and emotionally attached to what they are getting at the end. So it's a completely different attitude when you are there from the very beginning. You end up anticipating it in a completely different manner. And okay, so now let's imagine everything is done. The book is ready. We all know that it's not the end. There is a lot to do after that as well. So what about the book marketing and the distribution part? How is it organized?
Yeah, absolutely. So book distribution is one of the most interesting parts of the book business. People used to purchase books the way they used to purchase, or I guess the way we still purchase groceries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is you had a kind of an abstract idea of, I need to buy food. I need to buy books. So you would go to the bookstore and you would walk into an aisle, right? And you'd say, I want to, I need a self-help book. So you go to the self-help aisle, right? And you just start looking at books. That browsing experience is something that has really dissipated. And, I can only really speak intelligently to book consumption patterns in North America right now. But speaking to that, you do still have people that walk into bookstores and look around for sure. But there's no real browsing function in that way on Amazon. Most people don't go to Amazon and search for books. They go to Amazon with an idea of, I know the book that I already want to buy.
Mm-hmm.
They go to Amazon and they're either typing the title of the book, Thomas Piketty's Capital, into Google and clicking on the Amazon link, or they're going to Amazon and they're typing it into the search and then getting it. And that makes everything, when we talk about book distribution, distribution really involves two things. It involves logistics and sales. There is the moving of a book from one place to another. And that is, that's a logistics thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's something that, takes a lot of time, but, Ingram is obviously fantastic at that. And then there's the sales aspect. How do you convince a bookseller to purchase, a book? The Cat's Pajamas, our first book, will be at almost every major independent bookstore in the country. It's been purchased by Amazon, Amazon Canada. It's been purchased by Barnes and Nobles, and as I said, also all the independent guys. And that is truly, truly, truly fantastic. But I think that what you have to do to effectively sell a book is give it a life as something more than a book. You have to, the book is an intrinsically social aspect. Mm-hmm. It has an intrinsically social aspect. It's an intrinsically social being. And that's one of the most fun and interesting parts of crowdfunding, is that crowdfunding is inherently social. People back a project and then they go talk about it. When we went out to sell the Cat's Pajamas to bookstores, and we've sold almost the entire way through our first print run already, we said, 500 people bought this. Mm-hmm. Already. We crowdfunded all these copies of it. So this is the demand for it. It's here. We proved it. It's one of those things. Selling a book, I think, begins with understanding a book and understanding an author and understanding that author's audience. And probably more than any other aspect of the publishing process, this is where crowdfunding, I believe, pays the largest dividends.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, let's say someone has a book or two on Amazon, self-published, which did quite average, let's say. So he's not really happy with the results. And since he doesn't have time to learn everything and to deal with the marketing and, promotion of the book, is there a way to kind of relaunch it and have it on your site to try again, let's say?
So you're saying if they published with a an open publisher like Amazon?
Yeah.
We've had a lot of people come to us and say, "Hey, I published with Lulu or I published with CreateSpace, and I didn't feel that I had the resources, but I'd really like to try again." We have a book called it's wonderful. You should check it out. It's called The Astronaut Instruction Manual. Mm-hmm. And it's by, it's absolutely fantastic. It's meant to inspire kids to work really hard in school and believe in themselves, because they're going to need to if they want to one day work in space. And if you're 8 years old today, by the time you graduate from college, we're talking about 2030, more than 2030. And, there will be jobs in space. I mean, geez, we landed that thing on that comet, a couple days ago, Virgin Galactic, X-Core, Blue Origins, SpaceX, there is all of this amazing industry that's happening in space now. But my point is that this book was originally published with Lulu and didn't really sell any copies, and the author just didn't have the experience that he would have hoped for. And that's not a smack on Lulu. It's a fantastic company. It's just that, in the publishing process, you always got to figure out the right fit for every author. And this author has sold, I think, already $10,000 of books on our site and is almost funded. So yeah, it's really fantastic in that sense. We're generally open to it. I mean, it would depend on the contract. We have to be able to get the rights for the book. So as long as, one can take the book off of, CreateSpace or Lulu, then that's certainly something that we're open to.
Okay. And does he have to take it out from Amazon when he's putting the project on your site, or after it's backed up?
No, it would need to be taken off prior.
Prior to the thing. Yeah. Okay, I see. But then, I mean, when I'm looking at this, obviously there are so many advantages that it's worth thinking about. I mean, if it's just lying there and does nothing, then maybe...
Amazon's CreateSpace is an amazing open publishing platform. It's done more to change publishing than I can't even think of, anything other than that. It's an amazing product. It's an equalizer. There are people that have massively succeeded on it. Hugh Howey probably being the best example. But it's not for everyone. And, if an author, doesn't get the experience that they want on there, and they're able to get that experience with us, then nothing can make us happier.
Yeah, well, and I think that very often self-published authors don't have the resources they need to invest in order to get a good quality book, because it costs about $10,000 to $12,000 usually to just get through editing, design, and an initial print run. So that's a lot of money for someone that probably doesn't have the resources for it. Yeah, and especially if this person is not very good and he's just starting in the self-publishing and book marketing and, just learning the things, most probably he won't really get this money back with the sales he will be achieving. So it's just, it may be unjustified investment. And here you get another approach, another option where you don't really have to invest so much. And then you can try things out before, driving into more risky waters, let's say.
No, absolutely. 100% couldn't agree more.
Yeah, well, it's very, it looks amazing. Your site is very interesting. I encourage everyone to go and, search around, look a bit, get the feel of it. It's really very clean, very understandable, very clear. And I think once they are there, they won't have too many questions, especially after this interview.
Well, if they have questions, my email is adam@inkshares.com. And I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, so you've got the direct email address of the co-founder, guys. So go to the website and later on, if you have anything, shoot him an email. Okay, well, thank you very much for the information. I'm absolutely sure that it was very valuable and many people will be interested. And before we leave each other, can you maybe give some advice to newbie writers? Like, let's say they are writing their draft manuscript or they're just finished it. What do they need to do next?
Yeah, that's a great but difficult question because there's so many different types of authors. Yeah.
Well, you can just illustrate the possible options, different routes.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that the best thing that they can do is invite people they know into the publishing process. I think that wonderful things happen when authors talk to other people. We have Chris Cole is a great example of an author on our site who successfully crowdfunds, and every time he completes a chapter, he sends it to his backers. He's got hundreds of backers, and they all give him notes. Like, Chris, I love this. Chris, I didn't love this part. I think that the more you invite people in, the more you make it open. And that's not to say that you should, as an author, abdicate literary control, but just be open. Try and engineer the same dynamic in writing off of InShares that I think makes writing on InShares great. And that's not meant to say that perhaps comes across a little more self-serving than I would have liked it to. But I think that there are just great things that happen when authors engage with their audience early on. That's kind of one of the very much the zeitgeist of InShares. But we are really true believers in it. So it's the same counsel that I would offer to anyone who's just kind of like writing alone in a room right now.
Yeah, I agree completely, because I truly believe that, creating relationships with your readers is the best marketing you can ever do, because also, you get this emotional connection with the readers, which
I think that's really well stated.
Yeah, it's just a very, very valuable thing that once you can achieve that, then, everything else becomes so easy and so gratifying. So, I truly agree.
There's nothing more gratifying than having someone love something that you wrote. I was just, while I'm sitting here talking to you, I received an email from like a very large literary conference saying that our upcoming book called Slim and the Beast has been invited to be like the number one book that they're showing at this independent trade fair. And this is the author who I think I mentioned before had 17 Twitter followers when he started crowdfunding.
Oh, yeah. From France.
And he's just so talented. He's so hardworking, and people backed him. And I hope, obviously I'm biased and we stand to benefit from it, but like as his publisher, and I really hope that he gets everything that he wants. Not just because it means book sales for us, but it's a vindication of everything we set out to do. This is a guy who couldn't get access to traditional publishing, not because he wasn't a phenomenally talented author, but because he was kind of a nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Great guy, really cool dude, blast to hang out with, talented writer, but also just, hasn't had the time. He just hasn't had the time. He's 27.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't his fifth book. He hasn't had time to build the base, but people believed in this story. They'd read the first chapter and were like, you took me into a world and I believe in the story. And to now start to see people believe in the story on a larger scale is, it's beautiful.
Yeah, amazing. And, I think that it's worth experimenting and trying different routes. And, trying with InShares does not require any risk. So in worst case, your book won't be backed up. That's the worst that can happen to you, right?
Yeah, and, just to be clear, I've seen books that I really love not fund.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen books that I backed not fund. And, it happens. Not everyone's taste is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And getting attention and traction on the internet is an enormously difficult thing. Now I do believe that if you can succeed on our site, that you're really well positioned for success in the market.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still a big thing. And just kind of like, I guess, I know we're signing off, but to just, speak directly to, your all the people who have tuned into this podcast, publishing is hard. I could, forward you one of the Medium posts written by Sam, the author in France. And he said, crowdfunding was really hard, but it wasn't as hard as getting rejected, like 82 times or whatever, I think to successfully publish today as a newbie author, you really got to be willing to run through walls.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's very crowded, and you kind of fight for the attention in a space where, the attention span is very low and people are very busy, and, there are so many things to look at and to read and so little time that it's, you have to be able to grab the attention as soon as possible, which is quite tricky. Not everyone can do that. It's hard.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and InShares on this. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for dedicating the time for me and for my listeners. I'm absolutely sure it's been a valuable experience.
No. Thanks from us. And if you're ever out here in sunny California, give us a shout.
Okay. Well, that was all I found out about crowdfunding your books. Hopefully, you've got most of the information that you needed for this. If no, you can always go to their website and check it out at InShares.com. And if for any reason you would like to find out a bit more about me, then you can go to my website at www.anialexander.com. Ani spelled A-N-I. Well, today is quite gloomy and cold weather in here. It's cloudy, it rains. It's been quite dark almost the whole day because of the clouds. So I wasn't very productive because of this, but I managed to edit and put this podcast episode just for you. So take care, keep on writing, look for the best route that you're going to take when your book is ready, and make sure that we hear about your book and we get the chance to read it later on.